Hi, I'm Brandea Miller, just a girl who feels like she barely survived from being 18 to 29, from an abusive marriage to divorce, pregnant with my sweet girl to the mom of an angel, and this was all before I was even 20. Since then, I married the high school sweetheart, had a sweet boy, wrote a few books, blogs, and in 9 years, 3 states, 4 cities, 13 homes, 2 hotels, 1 angel girl, 1 sweet boy, a bunch of jobs, and an insane amount of love and laughter. Here I am, 30 years old, talking to you, sharing my wisdom from the infinite lessons I have learned while still learning to navigate around the things that I haven't. Come along and navigate with me. There is room here for your joy, your grief, your hormones, your emotions, your friendships, relationships, heartbreak, and all of the other things that come along with being in your 30s. Hey 30-something gang, welcome back to the In Your 30s podcast with your host Brandea Miller. If you are new here, welcome. I am so glad that you are here with us today. Now, today we are going to be talking about something that I think at this point in our lives is so important, and this is knowing when to walk away from relationships. Because at this point, we don't have time for games, and we definitely do not have the patience for anyone's BS. So it is very important to be able to identify and know how to move forward when it's time to walk away from a relationship. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships here. We're going to talk about friendships, we're going to talk about family ties, business partnerships, all of that. And even just casual connections that might drain you a little bit more than you've previously realized. I know that this is February and everyone is focused on love and, being in love and relationships. But I think the biggest thing that we should focus on is self-love. And for me, that is my focus this February. I'm not focusing on being extra super in love, which I'm married and we are in love, but I'm not like trying to be all ooey gooey, mushy gushy online and, all that stuff. I'm trying to focus on me. I'm trying to focus on figuring things out for myself lately. And thankfully, I have a very understanding husband. And he understands my desire and my need to focus on me. Valentine's Day's really not been a thing we ever really focus on because it's just so commercialized. And quite honestly, we have a very weird love language. Like, our ideas of gifts are trees, property, things like that. So Valentine's Day candies and flowers are not spectacular to us. They're really not. So I like to use this month to really focus on the love that is most important, and that is loving myself. If you don't put yourself first, if you do not make yourself a priority, if you do not love yourself, nobody else is going to do it for you or to the extent that you deserve. It's up to you. And as you're growing and evolving, sometimes showing yourself the love that you deserve means that you have to realize that certain relationships are no longer serving the person that you're becoming or the purpose that you are living. And that's okay. Actually, it's more than okay. It's necessary for your growth and your well-being. And if every relationship always served us, we would never be growing. We would never be learning. We would never be evolving. We would never be changing. So go ahead, grab your coffee, tea, or hey, even a glass of wine. No judgment here. And let's get into it. So first things first, let's understand that there are so many different types of relationships that may not be serving you, may not be meeting your needs, and sometimes we have to reassess. I want to point out the difference between 5 different types of relationships that you probably have at least one of each in your life. And unfortunately, sometimes we outgrow these relationships and we have to reassess where the relationship is heading and the priority that it holds in our life. We also sometimes have to see if maybe this relationship is the cause of our setbacks or holding us back. I think a lot of times we think of romantic relationships, and that is definitely one of the big ones. But I think saying it's time to walk away, or even that we need to think about and reassess relationships, most people jump to a spouse or a romantic partner. And necessarily, that's not always where the problem lies, but it can be. And so, as obvious as romantic relationships are in this situation, they may also be some of the hardest for some of us. And we may get emotionally invested, we build our lives together, and walking away oftentimes feels like failure. It feels like wasting time. It feels like not really getting what you were expecting out of the situation. And it's just overall disappointment, even if you don't necessarily want to be with that person again. But staying in a relationship that's no longer serving you is not a badge of honor. It's actually a weight weighing you down and pulling you lower than you should ever be. And to look at those signs of imbalance and lack of respect and emotional exhaustion and to continue to push yourself through them actually isn't beneficial for you, regardless of the fact that your relationship is still together. Sometimes staying beyond our welcome actually can do more damage to the relationship. And so I think it's just very important to look for those signs and pay attention to when these relationships are no longer serving you. And understand that, yes, it does come with a certain amount of grief. Walking away from any relationship comes with a certain amount of grief. You know, when I was 19 years old, I divorced my first husband, and it took so much work to get him to sign the papers. He just did not want to sign them. We had been split up for like well over a year. It was exhausting, and I was literally chasing him down to get him to sign papers because I just wanted to be divorced so bad. I didn't necessarily even actually want to get married. And the day of our wedding, I actually asked my mom, hey, if I don't get married, are you going to be mad since you paid for all this? And she said no, but I was stupid and I went through with it anyways because, again, it feels like failure. And I felt like if I didn't do it, then, you know, I was admitting that I got into this relationship and it was working against me, basically. And at this point, people kind of suspected, but no one really knew about the abuse that was going on. So most people didn't even know about that part until it got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm ready to leave. And all of it went, you know, to hell, basically. But even with all of these things, the day that we went to court and stood in front of a judge next to each other and said, yeah, we want a divorce. We want to be separated and live separate lives and be single and move on from each other. Even though I did not love him, even though I definitely did not want to be with him, even though I actually wish I had not married him at all because it was truly the hardest thing I have ever went through, including the fact that we had a child that we lost as well, and he was still quite an awful husband in that situation. Even with all the pain, even with all of the negatives, there was still a little bit of grief. You know, maybe this was not the person I wanted to be with and spend my life with, and I should have never even married this person. But we did get married, and now it just looks like we gave up. Even though there was nothing to hold on to, in my eyes, in my opinion. Now, it has been expressed from him, and it has been expressed from some of his exes even, that he's had since we got divorced, that for him it did matter and it did mean something, and there was a lot of love there and all of that. And while his behavior during our marriage never reflected love, it was abusive and it was manipulatory. I do feel bad, and I have, spoke to him and made my amends for basically using him to make his mom mad. It's a whole situation. But the point is, there was still a amount of grief because it does still feel like a failure. It took me about, I don't know, probably a couple months, I'd say, to realize that walking away wasn't a failure for me. Because one, it probably saved my life. And two, it opened me up to the opportunity to be with someone who I actually did love and who I actually did want to be with and who I actually wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And for me, that was never going to be him. The second type of relationships that can be so freaking difficult to walk away from are friendships. Friendships can be just as intense and complicated as romantic relationships, depending on what you've been through with that person, how long you've known that person, the different situations that you have faced and overcome together. It can be more complicated, in my opinion, than romantic partners. But just like any relationship, you can outgrow each other, or maybe the friendship has become very one-sided and you're not fulfilled and getting what you need from it. And it's okay to let go of friendships that no longer align with who you are. I feel like at this point in our 30s, we have all done this. I have even had to take friendship breaks, I guess, from people who I have been friends with almost my whole life. Like literally 4 years old, just made friends in kindergarten. We've been friends for all these years without an issue. And then boom, now we kind of just need some space. And, it took us 2 years to reconnect again, actually. It's very important, though, to take that space, no matter how long it takes for you to regroup or to walk away completely when there's no longer space for you in the friendship. And I know it's hard because many times we see the people that we create friendships with as our family, our chosen family, even sometimes our soulmates above our spouses. And it can be really difficult to walk away from something that you feel is such a deep connection. Oftentimes I feel like we're a little bit more open to the possibility of friendships with people than we are romantic relationships. And so it makes it a little easier to get extremely quickly and intensely bonded with someone. And next thing you know, you're spending every day with that person, and your kids are growing up together. But sometimes even then, you can need more room than the space being held for you. The third types of relationships, and I know we have all dealt with a difficult relationship in this category, is family relationships. Family relationships are truly the absolute hardest, I feel like, to escape from, because there is this often unspoken rule that you have to stay connected to family, no matter what, and forgive and forget. But at the end of the day, toxic is toxic. Even if you share DNA, setting boundaries or even walking away completely could be necessary for your mental health. And In some cases, it can even be necessary to preserve the family that you have chosen to make, because oftentimes our blood relatives get jealous or insecure with the relationships and the bonds and the family that we create outside of them. Now, thankfully, my mom, I've never had to experience that with her, but I have experienced that with ex's parents and even my current husband's mom having an issue with our relationship, and it's exhausting. And the thing about it is, it doesn't have to be your family. It can be your in-laws. It can be the people that are married into your family, or you're married into their family. It doesn't have to be the people that you absolutely share DNA with. And unfortunately, there is just times where we have to walk away. Going no contact, walking away from family. I have to say, to do this, you are a very strong human being, because it is truly hard to think about or to know about the situations and the events and the family memories that you end up missing out on because certain people will be present and you are no contact with that person, or that person is toxic to you or toxic to your family or a trigger. And so it's just, you are very strong as a human being if you have chosen to walk away from a familiar relationship. Like, honestly, I have so much respect. Number 4 is business and professional relationships. Sometimes it's a business partner, sometimes it's a client, sometimes it's a coworker. Not every job or partnership is meant to last forever. Even if it's your passion, even if it's your, purpose, sometimes it can be your purpose, but you've outgrown this level. And especially if a business relationship is stifling your growth or compromising your values, it may be time to just go ahead and move on. And the same goes for toxic work environments. I am so quick as a business owner. I will fire a client. I do not care. You're paying me to do a job. I'm doing it to the standard that I hold myself. And if we have conflicting issues that go beyond what can be worked out in a civil manner, in a professional manner, baby, you're fired. I don't care, because I don't need your money bad enough to deal with your disrespect. Never. And it took me going through a very difficult situation with a company that I worked for in 2020. And I think I've talked about it before. I know I did on my old podcast. I don't remember if I've talked about it on any episodes on this one. But basically, I worked for this company. I was the first employee. Within 2 months, I was running the company. I was hiring. I was training. I was running all of the events. I was doing everything, basically. And I was working 100 hours plus each week from home, which is insane, because the point in working from home is to be able to be a little bit more present. But when you're running an entire company, you're overseeing an entire staff, you're keeping up with everyone's times, you're keeping up with all of the events, you're fixing all of the mistakes, you're overseeing, the salespeople that are actually at the events and talking to them, you're making the list, you're doing the spreadsheets, you're coming up with all the customers, you're getting in the people that other people are not able to get in, and you're setting 200 something appointments a week. You do not have time to be present in your real life. So to say I learned my lesson the hard way is a complete understatement. And it actually took 2 months of me crying all day, every single day, to actually get up the guts to quit, plus the expectation that I would work all day on Christmas, basically. And that wasn't happening. So I actually quit on Christmas. And it turned into a whole shit show, basically. But I truly learned the importance of ending business and professional relationships before it gets to that point, before it gets to a point where it has drained you and killed you, because it literally took me 6 months to reset my nervous system and stop feeling like I was shaking from the inside out. That's how traumatic it was. So when I tell you it is important, it is so important. It is so important because we spend a lot of times in our businesses and our professional relationships and lives because we have to eat, we have to pay bills, and that's just a requirement these days. And so we spend a lot of time there. And if it is draining every single thing you have, how are you going to continue to give to it, and how are you going to continue to give to the rest of your life? This is actually one of those relationships where it also can have a massive effect on all of the other relationships that we talked about before. Because oftentimes we can prioritize business and professional priorities and requirements over these relationships. So this is very, very important. This is a very important relationship to assess and be aware of and, pay attention to on a regular basis and act accordingly. And then casual or social connections. Those acquaintances or social circles that just drain the absolute life out of you. Maybe you're in a book club and you absolutely hate the women in your book club. You don't even know why you're still doing it. Maybe it's a group of people that you've just outgrown, or a social media connection that constantly brings negativity into your feed, or, even triggers you. And it's okay to hit the unfollow button. It's okay to stop attending the book club meeting. It's okay to cut the cord of this connection. And honestly, it can be really liberating. There have been plenty of times where acquaintances and people that I I apparently cannot speak today, definitely would not fit into any of the other relationships, have drained the absolute life out of me to the point that I feel like I don't even exist anymore. And for me, I have become a queen at unfollowing, deleting, blocking, just anything at this point to remove the negativity and the drama and the chaos, or to get out of a group that feels like maybe the walls are a little bit smaller than they should be and they're closing in because I'm getting to a place where I've grown bigger and I've grown past the ceiling of this room. And maybe you're not following along, but basically there's been times where I have outgrown or cannot tolerate the vibe or aura off of a person that I barely even know. Gotta cut the cord. Gotta hit the unfollow button. And like I said, it's liberating. It is a good feeling. There are people that I went to high school with that I just cannot follow on social media. I just can't do it. There's so many reasons. I'm not even going to go into it. But they just trigger me, and I just can't. So now that we have identified these types of relationships, how do we know when it is actually time to walk away? And I think this is the thing that is so difficult for people, because we're like, well, what if this is the time that things change? What if this is the time that things improve? We want so badly to believe the best in the people that we love and the people that we trust and the people that we have bonds with. And so it's so difficult to know, like, okay, this person has pulled the wool over my eyes more than once over the situation. At this point, I'm a broken record. Time to walk away. It can be very difficult to know when that is, especially if you're dealing with someone who has manipulatory concepts and behaviors, and they do really well for a little while and then backtrack. it can be hard to tell if they're doing it on purpose or if these are just coincidences. So, how do we actually figure it out? How do we tell the difference? And how do we know when it's time to walk away and free ourselves? I don't want to say give up, because it's not giving up. It's making space and giving yourself room for something new. So, how do we know when it's time to walk away and free ourselves? The first sign is you are feeling more drained than you are energized anytime you're around this person. After spending time with this person, just being in the room with this person, notice how you feel. Do you feel uplifted or more exhausted? Relationships should fill your cup, not just empty your cup. And yes, they are give and take. There will be times where you do have to give more than you get in return, but it should not be every single time. It should not be the moment that you walk into a room or find out that this person is around that you are just instantly done. Anytime that you are giving more than you are getting consistently, you are always the one that is reaching out. You're always the one making plans. You're always offering support. You're always showing up. No one's ever there for you, or that person is not there for you. Done. Done. This is when it's time to walk away. Relationships should not be a one-way street. They should be two ways. Both people should be able to come and go as pleased, as needed, and be able to leave with a full cup when possible. It's very important to understand the difference between the fact that sometimes our friends just don't have anything to give us to fill our cup, because their cups are also empty and they've got it. They just don't try. They just aren't there for us. They just don't show up. Our cups are always empty. We're always filling theirs. We're always showing. We're always giving. Knowing and understanding the difference between sometimes this happens and this is a very consistent behavior is so important in actually understanding when is the time to free yourself and walk away. Anytime that you are experiencing constant negativity, constant criticism, time to go. There's a difference between constructive criticism and someone who is always putting you down, making you feel like they're more than you or better than you, you're less than them, you're not as good, you're not as wealthy, you're not, whatever the case may be. That's a giant, and I mean a giant red flag. Now, in my personal opinion, most people cannot take constructive criticism very well. As people, we just fail to do that. I've just noticed that, and people are going to be all offended by that, but it's probably 99% of people cannot take constructive criticism. However, I would also say a good percentage of people don't know how to give constructive criticism, rather than putting someone down and just basically crapping on them. And it can be in the words, the tone, the moment that you choose. It can be a lot of things that contribute to how your criticism comes across. And also, another thing is the intent behind the criticism. We have to pay attention to that person's intent and their motive behind giving us the criticism to really know where it falls as well. Now, I will say, I am not great at giving constructive criticism. I don't know what it is about the way that I talk to people, but it just comes across wrong. And oftentimes I do feel like my intent is misunderstood, because my intent is never to make someone feel bad, and I have this problem with my sister. There are times where I voice how I feel because I'm concerned and I love her, and it doesn't come across, or I don't deliver it properly. for her to accept it properly. And so I think sometimes it's a two-way street. Some people don't know how to accept it, and sometimes we don't deliver it very well. I'm guilty of it as a big sister because I am an older sister and I love my siblings and want everything that I've gotten to enjoy and experience for them. And it's very important to be able to say, hey, you know what? I am guilty of this, you know? So, yeah, it can be very difficult to comprehend and to deliver constructive criticism properly. So this is something that you have to pay a lot of attention to. Pay attention to the context, pay attention to the situations, the motive, the tones, the words, everything. Anytime that you have a relationship with someone who has different goals, different values, and different morals, sometimes you just grow in different directions. Maybe you want different things out of life. Maybe you have different priorities because of your goals. And it can cause a lot of friction. It can cause a lot of issues. It can cause a lot of anger. It can cause resentment. It can cause so many things to go wrong in the relationship that destroys the love and the bond that you have for that person and the bond that they have with you and the love that they have for you. Anytime you find yourself walking on eggshells, feeling like you can't be who you truly are, putting on a mask, pretending, or even having to lie about who you are or the things that you want in life, you need to walk away. Feeling like you cannot be yourself is such a toxic behavior to accept. And in the end, it ultimately only hurts you because it definitely holds you back. How are you living in your purpose if you can't even be yourself? And then anytime that your boundaries are constantly disrespected and crossed, despite you communicating them clearly and concisely, this is a major problem. This is a massive red flag. This is a time to walk away. This is a relationship that's no longer serving you. It's no longer helping you. It's holding you back and it's hurting you at all cost. So here's the thing. We've all been given the advice to not overstay our welcome. So now that we have talked about moments that can define when it is time to walk away, let's talk about the negative consequences of overstaying our welcome in toxic relationships, in unhealthy relationships, or in relationships that have significant consequences on our mental, emotional, and even physical health. It's important to note that studies have shown that toxic relationships can lead to chronic stress, which affects your mental health and can manifest physically, according to research from the American Psychological Association. Prolonged exposure to negative relationships can increase your cortisol levels, leading to anxiety, depression, and even things such as heart disease. Another important consequence to note is lower self-esteem. Constant criticism and emotional manipulation can erode your self-confidence. Research indicates that individuals in toxic relationships often internalize negative feedback, which can impact their sense of self-worth and hinder their personal growth, making them feel like they're not capable, not worthy, and not able to do things that they're absolutely worthy and capable of doing and accomplishing. Now, I did a little research because I wanted to know why we internalize negative feedback, and I found that there are a few reasons for this, and often they are tied to how our brain processes social interactions and personal identity. So, some of the key factors are basic evolutionary biology. Humans are wired to seek social acceptance because historically, being part of a group was essential for survival, and negative feedback can feel like a threat to that acceptance, triggering stress responses. Another factor is self-concept and identity. And basically, if negative feedback aligns with our own insecurities or self-doubts, we are more likely to believe it and internalize it. And it reinforces what we already fear or think about ourselves. Another thing is cognitive biases. Our brains naturally focus more on negative experiences, the negativity bias, basically. But it does this because negative experiences can signal potential danger. So, this makes us more likely to dwell on criticism over praise. Past experiences can frequently have a massive effect on how we internalize things and how we think of the criticism that we take from people. And if someone has faced frequent criticism, especially during their formative years, they might develop a pattern of believing negative feedback is more valid than positive reinforcement. And then, of course, everything boils down to power. Power dynamics, feedback from authority figures or people that we deeply care about or truly love hold so much more weight. It makes it harder for us to dismiss it, even if it's unfair, even if it's untrue, even if we're aware that it's unfair and untrue. Now, I'm sure there are other factors depending on different circumstances, but these are some of the most powerful factors for why we internalize the negative criticism and how it affects our self-esteem ultimately. Another thing is impaired decision making. So, this is a horrible consequence, if you ask me, of staying in a relationship for too long. And this is how so many people have that I was driving the getaway car story, basically. And you know what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about literally, but metaphorically, they were just an accomplice who was with this person and just doing this because they love that person and blah, 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 blah. That's how so many people end up in that situation and with those stories, because when you stay in an emotionally draining relationship, it becomes harder to make sound decisions, both in your personal and your professional life. A study published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that people in stressful relationships are more likely to struggle with problem solving and critical thinking. And it makes you wonder if that is why it seems like so many people weaponize incompetence, but in reality, they're actually just on or in a very stressful relationship, and you can't tell they're not being honest, they're not voicing their true feelings or opinions, and it's just affecting them in a way that looks like they are manipulating. Now, I'm not going to say that's everybody because some people are really manipulating, but it's very interesting to see if in some cases that may connect the dots. And this can be especially true in romantic relationships where you feel like your partner is just not engaged and just not really part of the relationship. And maybe they're not, and these consequences and these behaviors from that are beginning to infiltrate. Another thing is physical health decline. Toxic relationships don't just affect your mind and your confidence, they actually can take a toll on your body as well. Chronic stress from unhealthy relationships has been linked to high blood pressure, weakened immune systems, and increased risk of chronic illnesses. And then, of course, we know that stunted personal growth is always going to be an option for consequence in a relationship that you have overstayed your welcome. Being in relationships that don't support your growth holds you back so tremendously from reaching your full potential. And we all know somebody who is willing to hold themselves back to stay in a relationship they have long outgrown and that does not support the growth that they currently are at, the level that they are at. Surrounding yourself with that kind of negativity can really make you hesitant to pursue new opportunities, take risks, and it can even force you to feel like you have no other choice but to self-sacrifice and give up the things that you love or you want or you're passionate about because you need to be able to stay where you're at to keep the relationship where it's at, which ultimately isn't even serving you. Now, ultimately, we also need to pay attention to the fact that we can see multiple behaviors and consequences that tell us to walk away in one relationship, or we can see all of them in different aspects of different relationships. But the part that you really need to pay attention to is when it becomes a consistent thing that negatively affects how you feel about yourself. So once you have identified these things, whether it be in one relationship or every relationship you have, now it's time to move on. But how exactly do you actually move on? You know, I'm a firm believer that you do not have to cause chaos and confusion and further drama from a dying relationship in order to cut it off. You can leave gracefully and bow out quietly in so many cases. So, how exactly do we do that? The first thing I feel like is very clear, and it's just be honest and be kind. Like, it's very simple, and it's usually something that you can do pretty easily. You know, make sure that the situation and the cutoff and the relationship actually requires a conversation before you have one. But if it is appropriate, have an honest conversation. You don't have to be mean, you don't have to be harsh, but you can be clear and you can do it with kindness. Another thing is setting boundaries. We always talk about setting boundaries, setting clear boundaries, clear and concise. Sometimes it's about creating distance rather than cutting the ties completely. Be clear about what you need, be clear about what you are not willing to tolerate, and be clear about where the line is drawn. And ultimately, you're going to need to accept that it's probably going to be awkward. It's okay if it feels uncomfortable, and it's okay if it kind of makes you nervous. Growth usually is awkward. It usually is uncomfortable. You cannot grow in a situation where you are super extra comfortable and relaxed and not focused on advancing and moving forward. You can't do it. Growth happens when you step out of your comfort zone. Growth happens when you are no longer in the place that makes you feel absolutely the most coziest and feels the easiest. You know, growth is not easy at all. It's hard, no matter what ways or how you need to do it. And don't feel guilty for prioritizing your well-being. You have the right to protect your energy. You have the right to protect your peace. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to protect your life, your family. You have that right. Do not feel guilty, because at the end of the day, they don't feel guilty for taking advantage. They don't feel guilty for neglecting you. They don't feel guilty for criticizing you in a way that has constantly made you feel less about yourself. They don't feel guilty when they do it, and they don't feel guilty when you confront them. So why should you feel guilty because you're standing up for yourself, protecting yourself, and loving yourself enough to say, this is not okay. This behavior is below what I'm willing to accept. I'm just saying, do not feel guilty for prioritizing your well-being. And give yourself time to grieve. You know, even if a relationship isn't healthy, it's still a loss. Allow yourself to feel all the feelings. You know, like I said, I was still feeling grief when me and my first husband got divorced. He was abusive. He was not a good daughter. He was not a good father to our daughter. He wasn't there for her. He knew when she was sick. He knew when she was in the hospital. He knew he was also welcome to see her anytime, day or night. He never made the effort. And ultimately, I was still a little sad because it was definitely the close of a chapter. And we had also lost a child. So the fact that it was really the close of that chapter too, because there was no desire for a reconciliation, and there was no desire for us to move forward together and heal together. And so it was really an interesting journey, but there was still grief. And then make sure that you use I statements. I think in the last episode it was that I talked about using I statements and how it can benefit us in a conversation to keep the focus on our words and us, and not placing the blame on other people or the other person directly in a way that makes them feel like they need to get defensive and make them, feel like they need to, stand up for themselves. And it ends up being a complete switch of tone in the conversation and the situation, and then it becomes hostile and chaotic. And so it's so important to use I statements every time that you are giving feedback or criticism. It should be from your point of view. And when you use I statements, it puts it in your point of view from the way that you feel, without calling someone out in a way that gets them on the defense. And I think it's beautiful to incorporate in a conversation. It makes conversation easier, in my experience, to say, this is me. I need more than this. I need to be happy. I need to focus on me. I need to love me. These things. So I think it's beautiful. I think it's great, and it's very, very helpful when utilized. Now, understand that the actual act of cutting someone off or closing a chapter on a relationship can look very different. For me and my ex-husband, it was getting a divorce. For me and, family members that I maybe am cutting off temporarily or cutting contact with, even maybe permanently, it looks like getting a new phone number and just not giving it out. With friends, sometimes it just looks like removing them from social media. There's different ways that you can take action, but when you take action, these steps are so important to understand and to remember, and it allows you to do this with kindness towards yourself and giving yourself grace in this new adjustment period and this new process that you're going through. That comes with all kinds of different emotions, whether it's anger or resentment or grief or, love for yourself or excitement because you're moving forward, nervousness because it's something new, whatever the case may be, whatever you're feeling in the season of growth. It's so important to give yourself grace through those feelings, because there are times where we can feel relief and then we feel bad because we felt relief in a moment prior. And so it's so important. Grace and kindness towards ourselves are so important in these steps and in these moments and in these seasons of growth. No matter how the growth looks or the actions for the growth look. Now, I'd love to hear from you guys. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship? How did you know that it was time? What did the process actually look like for you? I'd love to hear these things. You can leave comments on the show, or you can always shoot me a message on Instagram. I will link my Instagram on here. But send me a message or whatever and let me know, how did you know it was time? How did you know to walk away? How did you know that you needed more growth than the box that you were currently in would allow for? All right, friends, that's it for today's episode. Remember, walking away is not failure. It's freeing. It's a powerful act of self-love. You deserve relationships that nurture, support, and uplift you. And sometimes the bravest thing that you can do is let it go. If you enjoyed this episode, do not forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might need to hear this today, who might be ready to walk away, or who might just need a little guidance on how to assess the relationships in their life. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will catch you guys next time on In Your 30s. Bye.